triggers, anything that sparks an emotional response in addicts that in turn lead them to a thought that their substance of choice will calm them down. And I could even expand more on triggers, but this is just a basic definition. Triggers are very interesting because they can really trigger a lot of different emotions. You be stressed, you get it, and you're stressed out. And you just say, then you might be sad, or you can get a trigger, and all of a sudden you're happy. It almost feels like you're free, because at that moment, as soon as that trigger, you might not eat for 5 hours until after that trigger, but you might be happy because you have decided that you're going to indulge. You smelled somebody barbecuing. You haven't eaten meat in several months, but doggone it, you smelled that, and at that moment, at that exact moment, you decided, whether you consciously decided or not, subconsciously, you're gonna eat something that day. And that's where transitionary methodology becomes so critical, because if you can have a game plan of when you lose control, you have some place to step back to. That's what I notice with people that don't get into the transition methodology, is that when they go through their relapse that is inevitable, they don't have a way to navigate a relapse. That's what the transition is all about. You learn how to navigate relapse, because relapse will happen. Believe me, it's gonna happen. And this is something that concerns me with a lot of the raw food proponents, is they don't get into this enough. I'm not seeing enough people talk about the relapse, which is inevitable. I don't know any of those gurus or those people that talk about the raw foods or vegan or any of that. I don't know any of them that don't have a relapse story. And it's interesting, and I hone in on those. When I hear somebody talking about a relapse story, my ears perk up, and I'm like, let's hear what you did. Let's hear the way you dealt with this issue. And that's the type of stuff I like to share, that information. I don't like to hide it. I want to talk about that. Once you understand that relapse is inevitable, it's a part of this process, it's part of the transition, then you can begin to be very strategic in how you approach it and how you deal with it. And you can kind of, ride that roller coaster on through. Keep doing your enemas, as Brother Air would say, and understand that when you step back to something that's not as bad as where you started from. And I've just seen it time and time again with raw foodists that don't transition. When they step back, they step all the way back. They might be going for years just like, yeah, I'm raw and I'm this and that, and then all of a sudden, because they never learned about the cooked mucusless options, the cooked mucusless foods that can help get you from point A to point B, or the cooked mucus lean foods, because they've disregarded that step, they don't have that step to go back to. And so they might go all the way back to meat. And then and I saw there was somebody that did that with the paleo. They were hardcore raw evangelists, and then when they stepped back, they just went into some paleo diet mess, and which is not where it's at. So it is relapse. I need to do a whole separate video on relapse, and I could do a whole course on relapse, or just like a whole section. But this is something that we got to be prepared for. We got to and start really sharing the stories of that's where that 12-step support group mentality comes in. Is we got to start really sharing these stories, and I talk about some of mine in Spirit Speaks in the book. I talk about foods that I went back to and times when I in the beginning was getting off of meat and I would go back to it and that kind of stuff. Sometimes people that want to talk about these diets, they want to act like they never had relapse or that they just, and there's an aspect of that you don't want to scare people away. You want to inspire people, but at the same time, you got to be real about what is coming down the pike. And so there's got to be a balance, I think, as far as that goes. So major pus and mucus relapse triggers, wrong social environments. I put that at number one, because that you can be doing well, but then all of a sudden you go get into a social environment that reminds you of your old habit patterns, or you're around some old friends or something like that, and it's like, and before you know it, it might start with just something little, but that can snowball to the point where out of nowhere you thought you'd never eat meat again, or you thought you'd never have dairy again, and all of a sudden you're sitting there just like it was 10 years ago, eating exactly how you used to eat. And the problem is it's a lot worse now because your body has started the process of changing if you've been on the diet for any period of time. So your body's already changing, and when you go back to those foods, the effects can be so much more devastating. And that's something that your mind actually is trying to rewire itself. That's part of the rewiring process. It's part of the relapse process. Is actually like a rewiring, classical conditioning, whereby you go back to something that harms you, you feel sick, it hurts, and you go through the process of this was terrible, and then it reminds you like, okay, the next time you're going to think twice before you do it again. And that's really a really important aspect of the transition of the Mucusless diet, is this classical conditioning model. That's actually something else I could talk about that I didn't really get into in this presentation. But yeah, there's this classical conditioning it's the lowest level of conditioning in terms of retraining yourself, but there's some of it that's totally mandatory, that's just gonna happen naturally, because and another way to frame it is karma. It's karmic. Cause and effect. Because we ate pus and mucus for so long, for so many generations, we got to pay dues. So we're going to go through the cravings. We're going to go through the some of the pain and suffering, that was in store for us later if we were to stay on that path. But now we're bringing it to us. So we're going to try to expel that karma now. Physiological karma is a term I use in my book, but you're going to try to get rid of that now. So you bringing it towards you, as opposed to suppressing it and pushing it off for a later day. Other triggers, media depictions of pus and mucus eating, smell of foods, and their seasonings. That was a big one for me. When I was first getting off of meat and stuff, I was in college, and you go out walking around, outside. There's all, you can just smell food everywhere, and so I would be doing well, but as soon as I go outside and I smell that stuff, I'm like, oh wow, And what I came to realize was, it was the seasonings that I really craved. It wasn't necessarily the meat as much as it was the what the meat was fried in, or wasn't the white potato. It was what the white potatoes were fried in. It was the salt that was put on it. It was the the special sauce, the vinegar dressing things and mayonnaise, and that kind of stuff is really what I was craving, and not necessarily the meat itself. And so that was sort of a revelation. But you'll go through that. You'll go through these a lot of revelations and it's smart to keep track of them so that when you do have a relapse and you fall down, you can go back to something. If you have a diary or a video, a vlog, or whatever it is you do, you can go back and you can say, okay, I remember, so that it doesn't become lost to us again, because that's sort of what's happened to us. We forgot who we are. We forgot, because we got so constipated, we forgot what it is to actually feel human, in that way, and not feel just being stimulated. Okay. Feeling lonely or left out of old social groups, that can sometimes trigger, because everybody wants to be liked, everybody wants to feel a part of a group. And this is one reason why, for me, to this day, I don't eat in restaurants, and I try to avoid sitting down at any type of like formal meal settings, because it's a huge trigger for me to this day. That's what it's the same thing as when they say, an alcoholic for a long period of time, they're not supposed to go into a bar. They're not supposed to go to a place that was like their old stomping ground. A crack addict probably shouldn't go to a crack house and hang out. Why? Because that's a huge trigger. So for me, a restaurant is like a crack house for me. And so a lot of people are like, wow, you were so strong. You were able to stop. It wasn't about strength. It was about survival. It was about, I can't go to crack house anymore. I'm not strong enough to just, go in. And even if they sold food that would be, salads and all that kind of stuff, for me personally, I knew that just being in that environment, at some point I'm gonna slip. At some point, yeah, it could be a salad, but at some point I'm gonna be like, hey, why don't you, let me get that. Let me get that other thing over there. And I got real scared of cross-contamination, because I saw that. I think the last time I ever ate pizza, I was at Kings Island years ago. This was within the first 6 months of the diet. But the last time I had pizza that was bought from like somebody else making it, I noticed the cross-contamination. They had they were making it, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just get some cheese, because I'm trying to get off of meat, so I'll get some cheese pizza. But then I saw them cutting it. Now, to a lot of you, that would just be just totally normal. You just like, well, duh, of course there's cross-contamination. But that was my process of actually coming to realization of what was going on. Like, wow, I actually can't eat the cheese pizza, because they use the same knife to slice the pizza, the meat pizzas they do with the cheese pizza. So that sort of cut that out. And so again, this is all process. I talked a little bit long on that. But yeah, one thing that I would love to have you guys write down in the comment section is what other triggers can you come up with? So what are some triggers for you personally? And of course, I put a bunch of pictures up here. You can see, for a lot of people, the holiday season, family, and eating, that becomes a huge trigger. There's a club scene. When I was, I used to sort of be into the club scene a little bit, so that, that became sort of a trigger. I had to get out of that environment. Some people just, I don't know, a lot of people have chocolate fetish. I don't really have a chocolate fetish like that, but I'm sure this will resonate with somebody. Smoking and drinking happens to be quite a trigger. Football and sports and, all of that. Why? Because oftentimes when people usually don't watch sports just while they're fasting, most people tend to watch sports with a beer in their hand and cigarette in the other hand, conversating, talking with other people, the whole social hookup. Over here we got a family barbecue. So, these are just some of the ones that came to my mind as I was making this, but there's many of them. So I would love to see you put some of your worst mucus and pus triggers down in the comment section.